You know, when people think about nurses, they picture clean uniforms, warm smiles, and maybe a gentle voice telling you it's going to be okay. But what they don't picture is what happens at 3 in the morning, when the hallways are silent, the fluorescent lights hum like broken angels, and you're holding someone's life in your trembling hands. I've been a nurse for years, and I've seen my fair share of tragedies, car accidents, overdoses, quiet, natural deaths where families gather around and whisper goodbye. But nothing prepared me for that night, the night that still claws at my memory every time I close my eyes. It was late winter, a Tuesday night. The hospital wasn't busy, at least, not compared to our usual chaos. The kind of night where you almost let your guard down, where you think, maybe, just maybe, you'll get to sip your lukewarm coffee without being called into a storm. But storms don't announce themselves. They come crashing in. I was on the 4th floor, the trauma unit. My shoes squeaked against the polished tile as I walked past rooms filled with the soft beeping of monitors. I remember glancing at the clock, 2:17 a.m., that time of night where everything feels just a little unreal, like you're moving through a dream you can't quite wake from. And then the call came over the intercom. Code blue, room 412. Code blue. My stomach dropped. I sprinted down the hallway, heart pounding against my ribs like it was trying to escape. The adrenaline always hits first. Training takes over. You don't think about fear. You don't think about sleep. You don't even think about yourself. You just run. When I burst into room 412, chaos was already there waiting for me. A young man, no older than 25, was lying motionless on the bed. His skin was pale, lips tinged with blue. The monitor screamed flatline. Respiratory failure. Someone shouted. We moved in perfect, frantic rhythm, compressions, airway, epinephrine. My hands pressed into his chest, counting the beats, begging for his heart to remember what it was supposed to do. And as I leaned over him, I saw something that froze me. A photo, taped to the corner of his chart. A little girl, maybe 4 years old, with curly hair and the biggest smile you can imagine. His daughter. In those moments, when you're fighting for someone's life, you're supposed to block everything else out. You're supposed to focus on numbers, on breaths, on compressions. But my eyes kept flicking to that photo, to her tiny hands clapping, her grin missing one baby tooth. This isn't just a patient, my mind whispered. This is a father. We kept going. Minutes stretched into eternity. My arms shook from the effort, sweat dripping down my forehead. The room was filled with the sound of shouting orders, the harsh hiss of the ventilator, the relentless metronome of CPR. And then a flicker. The monitor jumped. A heartbeat. Weak but there. We all exhaled at once. A chorus of relief that lasted only a second. Because then I noticed something else. His skin was burning hot. Fever. He's septic. The doctor muttered, voice tight. Sepsis. The silent killer. Once it takes hold, it spreads through the body like fire, shutting down organs one by one. We stabilized him, or at least tried to. Fluids, antibiotics, ice packs to cool his blazing skin. The team moved like a machine, but I could feel the desperation bleeding into every motion. Because we all knew, sepsis at this stage doesn't fight fair. Hours passed in a blur. I stayed by his side, watching the monitor, adjusting 4 lines, whispering words he couldn't hear. And then, just as dawn crept into the sky, the door creaked open. A woman stood there, clutching the hand of the little girl from the photo. His wife, his daughter. The child's eyes landed on her father, tubes running from his arms, machines breathing for him, and she whispered, "Daddy?" Her voice was so small, so fragile, and for the first time that night, my hand shook uncontrollably. You see, as a nurse, you're taught to be strong, to carry other people's pain without letting it crush you. But that morning, standing in the cold light of sunrise, watching a child call out to a father who couldn't answer, I realized something I'll never forget. We don't just fight for patients. We fight for their stories, for the people waiting in the hallways, for the daughters clutching teddy bears, for the wives praying under their breath, for the parents begging for a miracle. Every beep of the monitor isn't just a sound, it's hope. And every silence that follows feels like the end of the world. That night didn't end the way I wanted it to. I won't tell you yet what happened, not yet, because to understand the weight of it, you need to walk with me through the rest of that shift, to feel what it's like to live inside a storm you can't stop. But I'll tell you this much. Whenever someone asks me why I became a nurse, I think of that night. Not because it was beautiful, not because it was easy, but because it showed me the truth. We aren't just caretakers of bodies. We are witnesses to the most fragile, most human moments of life. And some of those moments never leave you, no matter how hard you try. I wish I could tell you that once we stabilized him, the worst was over. But hospitals don't work like that. They don't reward you with clean endings or perfectly tied bows. They drag you into the gray spaces, where life and death wrestle in silence, and you're the unlucky witness. By the time the sun finally bled through the blinds of room 412, we had been fighting for hours. His blood pressure kept crashing. His fever raged like a wildfire, no matter how many cooling blankets we wrapped around him. Every time the monitors calmed, they would explode again. Alarms screaming, lines tangling, our hearts hammering in sync with the chaos. I'd step into the hallway for just a second, just long enough to suck in air, and there they were. His wife, sitting rigid in a plastic chair, her hands locked around her daughters. The little girl, she had stopped asking questions by then. She just stared at the closed door, her teddy bear's ear crushed in her tiny fists. They're things they don't teach you in nursing school. Like how to walk out of a room where a man is barely holding on, and then crouch down to look into the wide, terrified eyes of his child. What do you say? Daddy's fighting. That's all I managed. My throat burned when I said it. Back inside the room, the fight continued. His organs were failing, one after another like dominoes falling, kidneys shutting down, lungs collapsing into stiff silence. His heart, once strong enough to run after a giggling child in a backyard, now faltering like it had forgotten its own rhythm. We intubated him. Machines pumped air where his body could not. Felines dripped chemicals that burned through his veins in the hope they might win the battle for him. I kept glancing at the photo taped to his chart, the little girl's smile, the missing tooth. I swear it mocked me, as if it was saying, "You better not fail him." But deep down, I knew the truth. Sepsis doesn't care about photos. It doesn't care about children or promises, or the fact that someone had their whole life ahead of them. It tears through you like a storm, and no matter how many hands you put up to block it, sometimes you can't stop the rain. At one point, the doctor pulled me aside. His face was stone, his voice low. "We're losing him. We've thrown everything at this. The family needs to be prepared." Prepared. What a word. Like death is something you can ever be ready for. I nodded, even though my insides were screaming. And when I stepped back into the hallway, the wife looked up at me. Her eyes, bloodshot, rimmed with tears, desperate, begged me for something I couldn't give. I wanted to lie. God, I wanted to lie. But I couldn't. So I knelt in front of her, lowering myself to the level of the little girl, clinging to her lap. "He's very sick," I whispered. "We're doing everything we can, but it's very serious." Her lips parted, but no sound came out. The child, though, tilted her head and asked, "Is Daddy coming home?" That question carved me open in a way no scalpel ever could. Because how do you tell a child that the word home might now only mean photographs, memories, and the echoes of a voice she won't hear again? I swallowed hard. "We're still helping him," I said softly. "He's still fighting." And then I walked back into the battlefield. By late morning, his body was losing faster than we could fight. His blood pressure plummeted again, alarms blaring like sirens of doom. We rushed in, compression starting once more, the team moving like a machine powered by desperation. I pressed into his chest, again and again, counting in my head, sweat pouring down my back. My arms ached, my knuckles raw. I whispered under my breath, "Don't you dare leave her. Not yet." And for a moment, just a fleeting moment, there was a spark. A heartbeat stumbled back onto the monitor. Weak, erratic. But there, the doctor met my eyes across the bed. We didn't speak, But we both knew this wasn't victory. This was a reprieve, a pause before the inevitable. Eventually, the doctor made the call. His voice was heavy but firm. "Bring the family in." I froze. Those words always gut me. They mean we're not just fighting anymore. We're preparing for goodbye. The wife entered first, clutching her daughter to her chest. The little girl's eyes darted from the machines to the tubes to her father's still face. She tugged on her mother's sleeve and whispered, "Why isn't Daddy talking?" No one answered, because what answer could ever be enough? The mother crumpled into sobs beside the bed, her hand reaching for his, gripping it like maybe her touch could tether him back to life. The child, too small to understand, simply climbed onto the chair and laid her head against his arm. I couldn't look away. My chest felt like it was collapsing inward. You're supposed to remain professional, detached even. But tell me, how do you detach from that? How do you stand in a room where love and death collide and pretend you're just a worker, punching a clock? I felt tears prick my own eyes. I turned away, but it didn't matter. The sound of her crying, the sound of that child whispering, "Wake up, Daddy." It will never leave me. Minutes dragged on. His heart stumbled, then slowed. The machine screamed, then quieted, and finally silence. The doctor whispered the time of death. But what I heard was the sound of a world breaking. The wife wailed, collapsing onto his chest. The child looked around in confusion, tugging at his sleeve. "Daddy, Daddy," and there it was. The moment I'll never forget. Not the alarms, not the beeping monitors, but that voice. That tiny voice calling into a void that would never answer. Afterward, we turned off the machines. The room fell into an eerie calm, broken only by sobs. I stood there frozen, my gloves hanging useless at my sides. Because you think, when the fight ends, relief will come. That the chaos will quiet and you'll feel peace. But you don't. You feel hollow. Like the world just lost something precious. And you were powerless to stop it. When they finally left the room, the child clutching her bear tighter than ever. I helped clean the body, straightened the sheets, closed his eyes. We do it out of respect. A final act of dignity. But it never feels like enough. Because no matter how carefully you tuck the sheets, or smooth the hair, or dim the lights, you can't erase the truth. A father died, and a little girl will grow up with a photo instead of a hand to hold. I walked out into the hallway, and for the first time that night, my legs nearly gave out beneath me. My colleague caught my arm, steadying me. "You okay?" she asked. I wanted to say yes, to smile, to shrug it off, to pretend I was as tough as the uniform made me look. But all I could manage was, "No, not tonight." And then I kept walking, because in a hospital, even the heaviest grief doesn't stop the next alarm from ringing. The thing they never tell you is how quiet the hospital feels after death. Not just the room, the whole floor. It's like the walls hold their breath. The air hangs heavier. The fluorescent lights suddenly feel harsher. You can almost hear the silence pressing down on you. That night, when I finally left his room, I didn't even realize I was still carrying the weight of it until I reached the supply closet. I stepped inside, closed the door, and it hit me all at once. The smell of antiseptic burned my nose, and the sob I had been holding back ripped out of my chest. I leaned against the shelves, shaking, my gloves still sticky with sweat, my uniform damp, my hands trembling as if they hadn't gotten the message that the fight was over. It felt like betrayal to cry there, hidden behind stacks of gauze and sterile gloves, while a family's world had just collapsed down the hall. But that's what nurses do, isn't it? We patch our emotions together in private corners so we can walk back out with dry eyes and steady hands. Only this time, the patch didn't hold. When my shift finally ended, the hospital door slid open, and the outside world mocked me. The sun was rising, soft pinks and oranges streaking the horizon, birds chirping like nothing had happened. But something had happened. The world had ended for a little girl clutching her teddy bear. And here I was, walking to my car as if I hadn't just watched her childhood shatter in front of me. I sat in the driver's seat, staring at the steering wheel. My hands hovered over it, but I couldn't bring myself to grip it, Because I knew the moment I did, the dam would break. And it did. I sobbed until my chest ached, until my throat burned, until the windows fogged up with grief. People walked past in the parking lot, probably assuming I was just another tired nurse crying from exhaustion. They had no idea I was replaying the sound of a child whispering, "Daddy, wake up." That sound embedded itself in me like a splinter under the skin. No matter how much you scratch, it doesn't leave. You think you can compartmentalize. You think you can leave the hospital at the hospital. But death doesn't punch out when you do. It follows you home, sits at your table, crawls into your bed. That night, well, I guess morning, when I finally stumbled into my apartment, I dropped my bag by the door and collapsed onto the couch. I didn't even bother to change. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, my ears ringing with silence. And then I noticed something strange. The apartment was too quiet. No beeping monitors. No intercom announcements. No rushing footsteps in the hallway. Just silence. And you'd think that would feel like peace. But it didn't. It felt like absence. Like something was missing. And the missing piece was him. The man who should have walked out of that hospital, holding his daughter's hand, stepping into this same morning sun. But he never would. Sleep didn't come. My body was exhausted, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw flashes. His chest rising and falling under compressions. His wife's sobs shaking the walls. His daughter's tiny voice cutting through the chaos. At one point, I shot upright, gasping. For a split second, I thought I heard the monitor alarm again, but it was just my phone buzzing on the coffee table. A text from a coworker. "Rough night. You okay?" I stared at the screen. My thumbs hovered. What do you even say to that? I typed, "Yeah, just tired," and immediately hated myself for the lie. The next shift, I walked into the hospital with that same smile nurses wear like armor. The kind that says, "I'm fine. I'm strong. I can handle it." But the truth, I wasn't fine. Every patient I saw that night blurred into his face. Every time a monitor beeped, my chest seized. Every time I walked past room 412, my stomach twisted. There's this unspoken rule among nurses. You don't let one patient break you, because if you do, there will be nothing left of you after hundreds more. But I was breaking. At one point during rounds, a colleague noticed. She pulled me aside, her voice low. "You're off tonight. You good?" I forced a laugh. Didn't sleep much. She studied me for a second, like she could see the cracks under my skin. And maybe she could, but she didn't push. She just nodded and walked away. I wanted to chase her down, to blurt out, "No, I'm not good. I'm haunted." I can't shake his face. I can't shake her voice. But I didn't, because we don't say those things out loud. We keep moving. Nights turned into weeks, and still it followed me. I'd be grocery shopping and catch sight of a man holding his daughter's hand, and my chest would cave. I'd hear a child laugh in the park, and it would turn into a knife twisting inside me. One night, I dreamed I was back in room 412. The alarms blared, the wife sobbed, the daughter called out. Only this time, I was the one lying in the bed, tubes in my arms, chest exposed, and no one could save me. I woke up drenched in sweat, heart pounding, unable to shake the feeling that maybe that's what death feels like. Watching the world try to save you while you slip further away. The worst part, I started to resent myself, because I kept asking why him. Why did his face stick with me, when I'd seen so many others? And then the answer hit me. It was her. That little girl. That fragile voice asking questions no child should ever have to ask. She wasn't just his daughter. She became a symbol of innocence lost, of how fragile the thread between life and death really is. And I hated that I couldn't protect her from the truth. I tried to numb it. I threw myself into work, picked up extra shifts, told myself I was being strong, dedicated. But the truth, I was running from the silence of my own apartment, where his absence echoed louder than the machines ever did. Even when I wasn't at work, I found ways to distract myself. Endless TV, scrolling through my phone until my eyes blurred, anything to avoid the replay in my head. But trauma doesn't care about distractions. It seeps through the cracks, finds you when you're least prepared, and sometimes it It finds you when you're standing in the middle of a grocery store aisle, staring at a box of cereal, suddenly hearing a child say, "Daddy," and collapsing into tears in front of strangers. One night, after another grueling shift, I finally broke. I came home, locked the door, and collapsed to the floor. And I said it out loud, for the first time, "I can't do this." My voice cracked in the silence, and then softer, "I can't keep carrying this." It was like admitting it made it real, that I wasn't just tired. I wasn't just stressed. I was drowning, and I didn't know how much longer I could keep my head above water. Trauma doesn't politely knock before it enters your life. It barges in, drags mud across the floor, and makes itself at home. I thought I could keep it contained within hospital walls. Thought if I smiled enough, worked enough, distracted myself enough, it would stay there. But it didn't. It followed me everywhere. At first, it was subtle. I'd forget things. Small things, like where I left my keys, whether I'd eaten. Then bigger things, like forgetting appointments, missing phone calls from friends. My best friend Emily left me a voicemail one evening. "You've been MIA. Call me back, okay? I'm worried." I didn't call her back, because what could I say? "Sorry, Em." Every time I close my eyes, I hear a little girl begging her father to wake up. "What's new with you?" So I stayed quiet. The silence spread like a disease. Family dinners became unbearable. My mother would look at me across the table. Her fork paused midair. "You're not eating. Everything okay?" I'd plaster on a fake nurse smile. Just tired. Always just tired. But my father wasn't so easily fooled. One evening he said, "You're not here anymore. You sit in front of us. But your mind, it's somewhere else." And he was right, because my body might have been at the table, but my mind was back in room 412, back to the sound of that child's voice, back to the cold silence after the code. Even my apartment stopped feeling safe. Every shadow felt threatening. Every sound jolted me. The refrigerator's hum became the rhythm of a flatline. The neighbor's footsteps upstairs felt like rushing doctors. Sometimes I'd wake in the middle of the night, heart racing, convinced I'd missed a code, that a patient had died because I wasn't fast enough. I'd stumble to the kitchen, clutching the counter, gasping, only to realize I wasn't at work. I was home, but my body didn't know the difference. It bled into my relationships, too. I was dating someone at the time, Daniel. Sweet, patient, the kind of guy who held doors and remembered how I liked my coffee. He tried, God knows he tried, to be supportive. One night, he brought dinner over. Pasta, garlic bread, the works. He lit candles, poured wine, tried to make it feel normal. But halfway through the meal, I froze, because the way the candlelight flickered against the wine glass, it reminded me of the glow of the monitor before it flatlined. My stomach lurched. I excused myself, ran to the bathroom, and threw up. Daniel knocked on the door. "Hey, what's wrong?" I wanted to tell him, wanted to open the door and say, "I'm not okay. I'm breaking. Please help me hold the pieces together." But instead, I wiped my mouth, flushed, and said, "Bad day. Don't worry." And I saw the hurt in his eyes when I came back out, because he knew I was shutting him out. But I didn't know how to let him in. The nightmares got worse. Sometimes I was the patient. Sometimes the little girl. Sometimes I was both, watching myself die while begging myself to wake up. I'd wake up screaming, drenched in sweat, sheets tangled around me like restraints. Daniel started spending fewer nights over. He said he wanted to give me space. But I knew the truth. My darkness was too heavy, and he was tired of carrying it. I couldn't blame him. Work, ironically, became my only escape, because as suffocating as the hospital was, at least I had purpose there. At least I knew what to do. Monitor beeps, check vitals, patient crashing, start compressions, family sobbing, offer tissues, offer silence. At home, there was no protocol for grief, no manual for trauma, no crash cart for a broken mind. So I worked, and worked, and worked. My manager praised me. "You're dedicated, always willing to pick up extra shifts." If only she knew I wasn't dedicated. I was desperate. Desperate not to be alone with the echoes in my head. But even at work, cracks formed. One night, a patient coded in the ICU. The alarms blared, nurses rushed, doctors shouted, and I froze. My hands, which had moved 1,000 times before without thought, just stopped. The room blurred, voices muffled. My chest tightened. "Start compressions," someone shouted, but I couldn't move. Another nurse shoved me aside, took over, her hands pounding against the chest, and I stood there useless, paralyzed, tears streaming down my face. Afterward, my supervisor pulled me aside. "What happened in there? That's not like you." I wanted to tell her the truth, because every time I hear an alarm, I'm back in that room. Because I can't tell the difference between the present and the past anymore. But all I said was, "Sorry. Won't happen again." The guilt piled on. Guilt for the patient I couldn't save. Guilt for the family I couldn't comfort. Guilt for shutting out Daniel, for lying to my parents, for avoiding Emily. And underneath it all, guilt for the one thing I couldn't admit out loud. I hated myself. Because I wasn't the strong nurse anymore. I wasn't the steady hand, the calm voice. I was broken. And worse, I was ashamed of being broken. One evening, after a brutal double shift, I came home and collapsed on the couch. The TV played some sitcom I wasn't really watching. Characters laughed. Canned applause filled the room, but none of it touched me. I glanced at the coffee table. There were 3 things sitting there. A half-empty glass of wine, my stethoscope, and a bottle of prescription sleeping pills. And in that moment, an ugly thought whispered, "One swallow." That's all it would take to make the voices stop. The nightmares, the guilt, the grief. I picked up the bottle. My hands trembled. I twisted the cap, poured a few into my palm, and then I heard it. Not in the room, not in reality, but in my head. A little girl's voice. "Daddy, wake up." My chest seized. The pills rattled back into the bottle. My hand shook so violently I dropped it onto the floor. I curled into a ball on the couch, sobbing until my body ached. Because as much as I wanted the pain to stop, I couldn't be the reason another child grew up whispering those words. That was my breaking point. Because I realized I wasn't surviving anymore. I was existing, barely. And if I didn't face it, if I didn't find a way through it, I was going to lose myself completely. I needed help, but asking for help felt like failure. Nurses are supposed to be the helpers, not the ones needing help. We're supposed to be strong, unshakable, but I wasn't. I was shattered, and the first step was admitting that out loud. Admitting you need help feels like stepping off a cliff, but I was already falling, and if I didn't reach out, I knew where I'd land. The morning after I nearly swallowed those pills, I called in sick to work. Not because I was ill, though in a way I was, but because I couldn't pretend anymore. I sat on the edge of my bed, phone in hand, staring at the screen like it was a bomb. I'd scrolled past the number 100 times, employee assistance hotline. Finally, I pressed dial. The woman who answered had a soft voice. "How can I help you today?" And I broke. Words spilled out like I'd been holding them behind a dam that finally burst. I told her about the patient, the father, the little girl's voice that wouldn't leave me. I told her about the nightmares, panic, the pills on my coffee table. She didn't interrupt, didn't judge, just listened. When I was done, she said, "You've been carrying something unbearable alone. You don't have to anymore." And for the first time in months, I believed her. Therapy wasn't magic. It didn't fix me overnight, but it gave me language for the chaos inside me. Words like PTSD, survivor's guilt, compassion fatigue. It felt strange to put clinical terms to something that had felt so personal, so shameful. But it also gave me hope, because if it had a name, maybe it had a treatment. My therapist taught me to ground myself when panic took over. Name 5 things you can see, 4 you can touch, 3 you can hear, 2 you can smell, 1 you can taste. It sounded silly at first, but when my chest tightened, when alarms in the hospital triggered flashbacks, it anchored me. Back to the present, back to reality. I also joined a support group for healthcare workers. The first meeting, I sat in a circle of folding chairs, surrounded by people who looked just as exhausted, just as broken as me. One by one, They shared stories. A doctor who couldn't stop reliving a child's death in the ER. A paramedic who saw flames every time he closed his eyes. Another nurse who admitted she cried in her car after every shift. And for the first time, I didn't feel alone. Because these weren't strangers. They were mirrors. Each one holding a piece of the same pain I carried. When it was my turn, my voice trembled. There was a little girl. She kept begging her father to wake up, and I couldn't make it happen. Silence. Then slowly nods. Eyes filled with understanding. One of them whispered, "I know." And that was enough. At home, I started letting people back in. I called Emily, apologized for the silence, for pushing her away. She cried, said she'd been so scared for me. Then she showed up the next day with takeout and refused to leave until I laughed at least once. I told my parents more than just "I'm tired." I told them the truth. I wasn't okay. And instead of disappointment, I saw relief in their faces. Relief that I finally trusted them enough to let them hold some of the weight. Daniel, well, that was harder. By the time I opened up, we were already unraveling. He cared, but the distance I'd built was too wide. We parted ways kindly, but with the sting of what could have been. And maybe that's okay, because some losses can't be undone. Work became bearable again slowly. I still flinched at alarms, but I could breathe through it. I still cried in the supply closet sometimes, but I no longer hated myself for it. I remember what my therapist said. Strength isn't never breaking. It's choosing to rebuild every time you do. So I rebuilt, piece by fragile piece. Months later, I walked into a patient's room during visiting hours. A young boy sat beside his mother's bed, holding her hand. He looked up at me with the same wide, pleading eyes I'd seen before. "Is my mom going to be okay?" he asked. For a moment, my chest tightened. The past clawed at me, tried to pull me back. But I took a deep breath, grounded myself. 5 things I could see. 4 I could touch. 3 I could hear. 2 I could smell. 1 I could taste. And I stayed present. I knelt beside him. We're doing everything we can for her. And I'm here with her. You're not alone. His small hand gripped mine. And in that moment, I realized something important. I couldn't promise outcomes. Couldn't control life or death. But I could promise presence. I could promise no one had to face the worst moments alone. And maybe that was enough. Looking back, I don't measure time anymore by birthdays or holidays. I measure it by before that night and after that night. Before, I thought being a nurse meant saving every patient. Being unshakable. Strong. After, I learned the hardest truth. Sometimes you can't save them. Sometimes you're left holding the pieces of a family's grief in your hands. And the best you can do is not look away. That truth broke me, but it also remade me. Because now, when I walk into a room, I don't just see monitors and charts. I see human beings. Fragile, flawed, beautiful in their vulnerability. And I see myself, too. Not as the perfect nurse, but as a person. One who still hurts, still flinches, but keeps showing up anyway. I'll never forget that night. The sound of the monitor flatlining. The little girl's voice begging. The weight of failure pressing down on me like stone. But I'll also never forget what came after. The hands that pulled me out of the darkness. The voices that said, "I know." The slow, painful climb back toward myself. Trauma doesn't disappear. It weaves itself into who you are. But so does resilience. And sometimes, resilience is just surviving one night, one breath, one heartbeat at a time. So if you're listening to this, carrying something heavy, thinking you have to hold it alone, please don't. Reach out. Break the silence. Because the most traumatic night of my life didn't end me. It remade me. And it can remake you, too.